Aye, kuwe kuwa maduwe.
Aye, kuwe maduwe.
Aye, kuwe kuwa maduwe.
Aye, kuwe maduwe.
Could you state your name, please?
My name is Abner Joseph Boles III. And I emphasize that because it means that my father's name was Abner and my grandfather's name was Abner. And although those were slave names, those were heritage indicators for me. It made me connected to my father and my grandfather and his ancestors.
Could you please state your name?
Absolutely. My name is Olafemi Bankh Akitunde, also known as Brother Bankh.
Kevin Hill.
Kevin Hill. Well, thank you for being here, Kevin Hill. We're going to get started. One of the things I heard you mention earlier was about not having a lot of mentors when you were growing up and just, kind of throughout your career. But if you could be, say, a mentor to yourself, what would be the advice you'd give yourself, your younger self?
Yeah. Adulthood is not a destination. It's not something where, what are you going to be when you grow up? Because I'm still not what I'm going to be when I grow up. I don't think any of us are. We are a snapshot of ourselves, of where we are, when we are. And to understand that life is a complex journey. Life only gets more and more complex. And it's important to be more and more thoughtful about the decisions you make the older you get. And getting to adulthood isn't the goal, shouldn't be the goal, but figuring out how to thrive at each stage of your life and whatever those needs are, to me, should be the goal of life. And figuring out how, when you have something to give, how can you give from a full cup? And just put more perspective on life is something that I would tell myself. And I know that there's a lot more that I need to learn, and I'm anxious to learn those things from as many angles as I can.
I hear that. What would be some advice you'd give to a younger generation?
I'm going to answer that question a little differently. I think that the advice that needs to be given about the younger generation is to us. This world has changed more rapidly than it ever has in any set of decades in previous history. The change that I've experienced from 1978 until now, 40 plus years, the pace of change has accelerated faster than in any time in history. And I think it's very important for us to understand the challenges that young people grapple with. I think there's some advice that's universal that we can certainly give, but I think the best thing that we can do is seek to understand what their challenges are, what their needs are, and try to meet them where they are in terms of even knowing what kind of advice they might need. We need to understand their world. And even me being 43, to some people, they look at me as someone who's young, but some people look at me as, someone who's, kind of old with, a gray beard and everything. I think it's important for us to understand what young people are grappling with, because even since I've been here for, 20, going on 22 years, I've been out in the Bay, and I can see tangibly how things are so much more difficult for young adults than they were when I moved out here when I was 22 or whatever years old. And I think it's a lot more difficult to be 22, 23, be in your 20s nowadays. And there's a lot more pressures on them. And that's what I would say, that it's important for us to first and foremost understand them and their needs, where they're coming from, before we start giving advice.
Excellent. Around that, just as you're getting to some of the intellectual role models and other people around. You spoke about just even having some of this experience being in a predominantly white neighborhood, even though South Berkeley, West Berkeley, other places, had a much larger black population, or majority of folks was living over there. What were some lessons that you learned, just I guess, around your community that you may have gotten later because of where you were living, or you had to either travel to, or just have experience with other people that lived in a different area?
Are you asking about the neighborhood? I grew up in the black community in general.
Community in general.
Okay.
Yeah, community in general.
I think because I was a misfit in some ways, either like racially when I was in middle class settings, or class wise when I was with mostly black folks. And I think that piece of there are different ways and different strokes for different folks. So I've been, again, a misfit in that there I can navigate and have a real good time and real good relationships in different spaces, but never feel all the way at home in any one of them. And that's something I think that continues to this day, basically. But what I think it opened my eyes to at a pretty early age is, again, there is no single way to go about things. And I think that with community in general, that give and take of how does community allow for that, and either whether that be like supportive, and again, in Berkeley there's a rhetoric of diversity, whether what the reality is and how that meets it is a different story, but so some spaces really try to amplify that as a value. Other places try to tamp down on it, but still will leave space for a little release valve of like, oh, that happens over there. We don't talk about it much. We don't look much. But you see how even those spaces that are more taboo, or we don't talk about, it still has a really important social function, And so I think the community mechanics, or the dynamics of how a community comes together and expresses their values, that was something that I think I had to tune into from a fairly early age, because again, I couldn't just be in the space and expect that I could kind of fall back into it, be understood, understand everything, and just be 100% comfortable. There was always some stretching or bridging that I was doing in those spaces for the most part, and with the exception of on the sports field or on the court, where I just felt like I could kind of be.
Interesting.
Yeah.
And just around there, I think it's one of the things you've been mentioning. Like you said, spirit has come up a lot, and just having a lot of these experiences been able to kind of shape how you've been moving accordingly so far. So what would be some advice that you would have given your younger self?
I would say, face your fears early. Don't be afraid to ask for help and support. You're not supposed to do everything alone. Even though you feel like you got to conquer this world by yourself, you don't have to. I would say, be in the habit of practicing self-love and self-care at an early stage. Never be afraid to let go. Never be afraid to let go. What's meant to be will be. I would say hold on, because there was some turbulent times, ahead. So, make sure you hold on and just know, like my mother says, this too shall pass. Be patient with yourself and follow through. You do what you say you're going to do, And I would also say be still. I would say be still and create your plan and work your plan.
What are you most proud of?
You know, I'm most proud of my ancestors. I'm most proud of my DNA, the folks that came before me. I'm so proud of the connection that I have with my children. You know, I think that every group of people has their own ancestral wisdom. Everybody has a tree that they come from, you know, and each tree is designed to do something different and bear different fruit, different seasons, different weather, stuff like that. So in understanding my tree that I come from, it's a beautiful tree. It's a big tree. It's strong. It's a strong tree. It's been around for a long time. You know what I mean? It's a warrior tree. And I'm appreciative of that tree, and I'm appreciative of the fruit that it bears. And I pray that I could fertilize this tree in my life, and that the work that I do in this life will allow this tree to grow 20 times, 30 times bigger and impact the next 7 generations behind me.
I hear that. What would be some advice you'd give to your younger self?
Interesting. I thought about that a little bit on the way over here. When I remember back on my younger self, I'd have to answer that question at different stages of my younger self. When I was really young, 5 to 6 or 7, when I can remember, I was extremely happy. I remember I had food on the table. I remember the worst time that I can remember was when my father was out of work for a period of a month or so, and we were growing okra in our backyard. And I can remember a week where every day, whatever we ate, however it was prepared, it had okra in it. And that's the worst thing that I remember as a real young child. So what I would say to myself back then is you should have been grateful that you at least had okra to eat, and you had somebody to prepare food for you. When I got older, probably around 13 or so, I was feeling my oats. I thought nothing could harm me. I was rambunctious. I was thinking about girls and all of that. Looking back on my 13-year-old self, I would say slow down. I would say let things come to you. Don't be so eager to conquer the world, because it takes a lot of energy and effort, and the real journey isn't to conquer the world, it's to conquer yourself. Older, I would say, and I'll just jump to being a young adult. I actually thought I was all that. I thought, oh, I have a degree, I have a profession, I've learned a lot, I've gone to prestigious schools, I'm all that. What I would tell myself, and I did eventually tell myself when I had a child, was that you're actually nothing. You're really more a manifestation of what you're able to give and contribute. And I began a journey of raising a daughter to be a young woman. And I realized that that was my greatest contribution to this planet and to this earth. So I would tell myself back then, put more energy in being a father, put more energy in being a partner, a spouse, and put more energy, less energy in boosting yourself.
I hear that. I hear that. What would be some advice you would give to your younger self?
Which younger self?
Which younger self?
I think that there would be a element of like, trust your intuition. And I think some of the unlearning that we have to do in this country or this hemisphere is like, what feels right or feels wrong. There's something that we get and something pinches or constricts in our body or something like that. And then we have all this messaging about that feeling doesn't exist. This is good. Don't worry about that. Get rich, go to Disneyland, get a Mai Tai on the beach, whatever, whatever it may be, where it's like, and I knew that wasn't quite, but everyone was just, and I feel so grateful that, again, between my family, my community, the experiences I've been able to have, traveling, playing soccer on this team, whatever it may be, like I have had enough sense of self-worth, and I've listened a little bit to myself. Like I have kept an ear out. I haven't been completely cut off from that. But sometimes I'm like, yo, if I were more explicit with myself, if other people around me were more explicit of like, it might not make sense. It might not be a great fit in some of the structures of this world, but it doesn't make it wrong, and you're on to something. And I think that that's something that like going back to that education thing, like when we're in a power dynamic with a student or a youth where I think I have the truth and I am imparting that on you, I'm not going to leave a lot of room for like, what's that intuition you feel? Follow that. Because you know what? It's like classroom management is harder if you have like 25 kids who are all like, nah, my thoughts and feelings matter. And like, I'm not into how we have to sit like this and face forward and listen to this lesson about X, Y, Z. So I understand why that doesn't happen kind of practically in a lot of spaces. But I think we're in a place where we need to be co-creating with intergenerationally. And here's some wisdom I have, here's some game you have that, fuck, I don't know how to use the internet like that. What'd you find out? Like, how are you thinking about social connection? And I think that our social, political, economic, environmental mix that we have is based on so many oppressive structures and justifications for that. It's just so, it's like a house of cards. And if we tune into our own intuition more readily and more frequently, some of these things that it's like, how do we contort ourselves into this weird shape to serve this culture? We'll be like, oh no, we shouldn't contort ourselves like that. We should be like this. And that might mean that some of these structures need to fall off because we won't fit into that little box. And so I think I would tell my younger self, like, tune into your body. Your body is a compass. It's not just a tool to manipulate things in the world. Like, it can tell you things. And there's deep cultural wisdom that you've been alienated from that is some of those more explicit lessons. So like look into that. But even if you're just making the road by walking and following what feels right, we will net out better than where we are right now. And some of the cultures that we have to deal with that are so harmful.
Last question. What advice would you give to a younger generation? And as an educator, you're constantly talking to younger folks, but is there anything in particular that that stands out to you that you'd want to impart for advice?
I think it would be similar. I think it would be like, tune in with yourself. One of the frames that I use a fair amount in my work these days is compassionate curiosity. Like, lead with some heart and ask ask the questions, that curiosity and that inquiry, and when you put the compassionate with it, that's a very human inquiry, and we can get behind some of the shame and blame, and with you interpersonally, but intrapersonally as well. Why did I do that, or why do I act like this? And then we start to, if we can ask that question in a more generative and gentle and kind way to ourselves, like, yeah, why do I? What is that pattern about? And I learn a little bit about my history, or okay, that makes a little bit more sense. So if we can, again, lead with intuition and add a dose of that type of compassionate curiosity, and know that even though the things are as they seem right now, they don't have to be this way. And so what you're listening to and what you're experiencing and hearing in your own self, that's as valid as what this fucking TV commercial says, and probably more so. So like, lean into that and get curious about them both, honestly. But if you're curious about, why when I witness this type of power dynamic, do I go like this? If you follow that thread, you can get to some transformative places. Instead of, let me quiet that down, because like, I don't want that, so let me just, so yeah, I think I would tell a young person to tune in with yourself, and know that we're all navigating this, and it's all, there's so much uncertainty, and that's part of it. You know, we're part of this larger and more complex set of systems, and there's like great mystery there, and so that's cool. And when we follow our compass, we'll probably end up in better spaces. And again, in this hemisphere, in our history here, that might mean like, we're under pain of death sometimes if we step out of line or step out of our place that's been prescribed for us. But that type of physical death is not the worst outcome either, you know? And so even though there may be consequences at some times for following that path, again, I think where we net out is a much better place.
Interesting. And just around that, what are some lessons that, or advice that you give to younger generations, some of these younger brothers?
Same advice I would give myself, no different. Same advice, you know, be patient with yourself, love yourself, self-care, you know, come up with a plan, work your plan, understand there's gonna be some turbulent times in front of you, be calm, be patient, you know, weather the storm. All of those things, I would just say, you know, once again, don't be afraid to let go. You know, there will be people around you that really don't wish to see you succeed, that you know, deal more in fear than they do love. And love and fear can't exist in the same place at the same time. It's very hard for those two to exist in the same place. And so if you have people around that, you know, are very fearful, then they'll hold you back from doing the things that you want to do, because you're trying to tie into a group. You're trying to lock into something like a construct or idea. So, you know, once again, don't be afraid to let go.
Afraid to let go. I hear that.